International surrogacy is essentially a transnational phenomenon where a couple or parents or single people who want to have kids and for some reason cannot have their own biological kids go to another country and essentially pay, more often than not, a woman to carry their baby for them. Often this is a commercial arrangement and the woman in question is paid, but also it can be an altruistic surrogacy where no payment is made, but generally speaking, costs are covered for medical and housing and those sorts of things whilst the pregnancy lasts. I'm going to set the discussion out in 3 phases. The first phase is the Indian law. The second phase is the issues that the Indians would confront. And the third phase is to set up essentially Matthew's discussion. So what is the Indian position on surrogacy? It's a gray area, and until 2002, I'll rephrase that, from 2002, it was essentially considered legal. The next set of landmark was a Supreme Court case in 2008, where there was a Japanese couple who entered into a surrogacy arrangement with an Indian lady, and before the baby was born, the couple got divorced. And the commissioning mother did not want the child anymore. So we had this very sad and legally vacuumous situation where the baby did not have a nationality or parents at this time. The case went to the Supreme Court. Ultimately, how it was resolved was that the baby was given to the child's grandmother. But that case was quite a landmark case, I understand, in the Indian system because it actually increased the consciousness of surrogacy. Now, let me just say what the scale of surrogacy actually is, because I'm a barrister and public international law. A lot of my practice is national security and refugee law and all those sorts of things. So when I was preparing for this case, I was sort of fairly new to the area of surrogacy as such and children's rights as such. According to some estimates, the surrogacy industry in India is worth 2.3 billion US dollars. That is a lot of money, 2.3 billion US dollars. Now, when surrogacy was legalized, often there would be agencies that would connect, more often than not, Western people with people in India. And these agents, according to several reports, would essentially take 50% of what eventually went to the surrogate's family. So you can already start to see a sense of the exploitation. That being said, in an issue as complex and emotive as surrogacy, we have to be very careful not to morally judge too quickly, because one must have empathy with people who've been trying to have kids for a very long time unsuccessfully and wanting to have their own biological family. So I think one must be very careful about not passing judgment too quickly and focusing on the issue. What we found was that often the focus was on the rights of people to have a family or on the rights of the woman for reproductive health and to be in control of her own body. Both important but often conflicting rights and values. What was often lost was a child who was born. And as you will see, the case, the Baby Gammy case that Matthew and I ran before the UN Human Rights Committee was a case about Australian commissioning parents making an arrangement with a surrogate from Thailand. Twins were born. One twin was disabled, and that twin remained in Thailand, and the commissioning parents took the remaining twin back to Australia, so essentially broke the family. Now, Matthew is going to go into the very tragic details of that case, or robust in some robust way, so I'm not going to spend more time. But insofar as India is concerned, the arguments goes both ways. Some say that, including surrogate mothers, that, sorry to gather my thoughts, that it is our right, it gives us money, and the government should not intrude and try to be a nanny state. On the other hand, with equal force, it is said that no, it exploits women, there's abortions, and it's essentially wealthy couples from the West going and essentially hiring a womb for rent. It's a crude way to put it. So that is the background, and it's very complex, and I'd be intrigued in the Q&A session. The next topic is what the Indian proposed law actually is. The Indian proposed law was passed by Cabinet in August of this year. It has not gone through Parliament, so it is not law. So one must be very cautious about how we make conclusions on the Indian law. The positive thing, which on its face seems, while the legislation is not available, we've got public information, is that the rights of the baby are considered to be a factor in the legislation, which is a positive sign. The interesting, or the very important thing the legislation does, it essentially bans commercial surrogacy. But there's a problem. The problem is that surrogacy is banned for foreigners, including non-resident Indians, and there's around more than 20 million non-resident Indians, so it's quite a strong community. For gay couples, single people, and live-in couples. Now, I saw the foreign minister in one report of India said this was a cultural thing, or a cultural reflection on the law, but I think in the 21st century, culture cannot trump human rights. If, in my view, the law is passed, the law must not be discriminatory against certain sections of people based on their sex or lifestyle choice. Now, the caveat to that is that banning commercial surrogacy for foreigners is less problematic in my view, because the transnational nature of people crossing borders means that it is very difficult for states to regulate and prosecute when things go terribly wrong, and they often do. In that sense, one would think that the ban on foreigners within India perhaps is a welcome step, but more evidence would need to be looked at to reach a firm conclusion. And on some reports, 48% of people trying to enter these arrangements in India are foreigners, so it would essentially mean a huge impact for this industry, for the want of a better word. Now, before I hand over to Matthew, let me just conclude with 2 points. Point one is that one must be very careful before these sorts of bans are put in place, because what's starting to happen now as the problem is starting to be exported to Cambodia. So it would be not the best outcome if the problem just shifts from one country to another. That's one consideration. And the second consideration is, and that leads up to Matt's presentation, transnationally, it is a very difficult issue. The Indians acted because in 2012, there was a case where an Australian couple went to India, twins were born, left one arbitrarily and took the other back to Australia. And also Thailand, which was the other major hub for international surrogacy, recently changed its laws because of the Baby Gammy situation, the case that we did. And India is trying to follow that lead. I think it will be interesting to see what happens in India, and I'm very much looking forward to engage on this issue. Thank you.